recapture the flavor of what we did beginning in 1992 in Newark. Well, actually, we began earlier than that, but the Fireball started in 1992. In the early 90s, quite frankly, people were dying. And we still had a situation in Newark where no hospitals, or very few hospitals, I think there was only two that would accept HIV patients at the time. We didn't even know it was still a gay-related disease, and contributed to gay men, and then it became attributed to Haitians, and then it became everything except caring for people who were ill and people who were dying. At the time, I was a part of a group known as Black and White Men Together that started in 1980. And in 1990, after 10 years of traveling back and forth, like a lot of us were doing back in those days and still do today, to New York, I was working with Black and White Men Together around the issues of racism, sexism, homophobia, heterosexism, and ultimately HIV/AIDS. The group got a call because no one was doing that kind of work in Newark. And I was with the group, and because I was in a group that was mixed with black and white, I was learning a lot about the disease. And I felt at the time that I had to do something. So I decided that I would stop going to New York every week. When we got a call, and the group in New York asked me to be one of the people to come to Newark and to do a hot, horny, healthy, safer sex workshop. Patty Davis was the person who called us. Patty was from the House of LaBelle, and she called and asked for help because she was seeing so many of her family and friends dying. In 1992, Barbara Ford and I wrote a grant to the state of New Jersey Department of Health to do a project in Newark of hot, horny, healthy, wet, wild, well, safer sex messaging. And it wasn't hot, horny, healthy, wet, wild, well. It was just hot, horny, healthy because we were targeting men. But we expanded to wet, wild, well for women because that's who we were. We were working with women, and we needed help. And we're going to be talking about all of this in a little while. But it became Project Fire. And why we named it Project Fire, we thought it was very important to do symbols that were crucial to our people and crucial to our survival as a people, and that is remembering our history. This is the first publication of homosexual love among black people in America. And it was this magazine called Fire by Bruce Nugent. He's the one who wrote the article. So we started Project Fire. This is a t-shirt from Project Fire. This is the Safer Sex Handbook that we did the work, they did the training for those who were involved. And when we came to do a workshop, we had a table like this, and we also had the red, black, and green liberation flag because we felt that people will be liberated when they learn that it's okay to handle safer sex toys, to learn how to be safe, and learn how to enjoy sex, because sex is such a taboo subject in America, but everywhere you go, everywhere you see, sex is all over the place. And we felt it was crucial that we teach people that sex is good, sex is fun, but you have to do it safe, and you have to be responsible in your sexual behavior. And these are the toys we use. We still have them. They have been in my closet for several years now, just sitting there, and my husband didn't even know I had them until today.
Just sitting there.
Some things stay in the closet. So these are some of the toys we actually used back in the day. And we had common races. So if you were part of our, and we also had, by the way, we had some in the dorms here, because students, I was told, Dean Credle, those kids are over there sucking and bucking and nobody's telling them they better be safe. So we had some safer sex workshops, a home health party. That's the other key thing about it. We would pay people to have a home health party. And what we would do, if we pay you $100 and give you some money to purchase food, and then you bring in at least 15, 20 people, and then we would have people intimately involved, and some people would even bring their children, like 14, 13, 12 years old, beginning to have sex, and they would bring their children to those workshops, because we were talking about how to be safe, and that didn't have a limitation on age and sexuality and all of those stuff that goes with it. So these are the toys, and we're going to talk about the history with these people. So I want someone to help me, because this will distract us from our discussion. So we're going to move this out of the way.
Gender Studies program here, and it is my pleasure to just sort of get the ball rolling by giving our thanks to the various sponsors, and then I'll introduce our moderators who will take over from there. So this panel has been put on by a collaborative effort involving the Office of Student Life, LGBTQ Diversity Resources Center, run by Marin Greathouse, who I believe is out there and who deserves a lot of gratitude for the work she does for queer students and allies on our campus here. It's also being sponsored by the Women's and Gender Studies program, the History Department, and the Queer Newark Oral History Project, which several of us in the room are involved in, trying to begin to really document Newark's queer history through long-form oral history interviews with people. A few of our panelists had actually done them with us already. So if that's something that's of interest to anybody in the room, just get in touch with me afterwards. I would be happy to get you, kind of connected to the project in one way or another. And that being said, I think I can cede the floor to our moderators. Kristyn Scorsone is a grad student in the history department here, and Naomi Extra in the American Studies program, and they'll be running the show, asking questions of our various very accomplished panelists. So I'll give you guys the floor, and thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Oh, introduction?
Introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Bernard McAllister. I'm known as Bernie Jourdan, Bernie Ebony. As far as Ballroom is concerned, I think I'm as big as it almost gets, huh?
And so humble.
And I'm so humble. But that's who I am. I've been an activist in Newark for over 30 years. I don't know who was here earlier, but the kids that were on the panel, they're mine. I have over 40 gay children. I've buried at least 25 people, children of mine. Well, I call them my children, but they come into your home, they come into your house. I was the house mother. They were my children, and I've buried many people through this course of the ballroom scene. So yeah, that's me.
Bernie, before you move on to someone else, tell them about houses and what that means. What's the purpose of houses?
Okay, I like to equate houses to almost like frats, but there's a difference. When we first started, when I first got into the ballroom scene had already been out for maybe about 30 years prior to me coming into the scene. And we didn't have the internet, we didn't have so much inclusion as you guys are able to have now. At the time, being gay really meant that you would be put out your home. It was very high that your family would attack you. And so what houses did, it brought people together as a safe zone. And you belong to a house, so that meant you belong to a family. And you also can equate it to almost like gangs. Because we was called gangs. I was a little rough, got hit around the edges then. And a little. And we bonded together and we stuck together. We slept, when I say slept, we slept in the same home together, we ate together, we shared happiness, we shared sadness. We all had some type of hurt that would made us like bonded because, we were rejected by society, by family, we were taunted, we was laughed at, and there was only two things you could do. You could either roll over and play dead, or you can pick up a stick and hit them back. So as you can see, I'm still here. I hit many people with sticks. And that's how I survived the onslaught. And as I grew, the house grew. We went from maybe 10 people to maybe 70 at one time at the height of the house. When I first started walking balls, there were maybe 10 houses. Right now, there's maybe 50 to 60 houses. We're in Russia. I have house members in Australia, London, Paris. So I've been doing this a long time. And again, I think people don't quite understand, you know, it's easy to say, oh, I'm sick now and I can go to the doctor. But when you were sick then and you had no one but your house members, there was no social workers coming to the house saying, well, oh, we have housing for you, because there was no housing. Most people didn't even have insurance, and there was definitely no Obamacare. So you were basically on your own to survive any way that you could survive. And what was strange about it, we were in the richest country in the world, and we were at war. I didn't even know I was at war until the war ended. I was like, whoa, that was war. Because the casualties, and this is not exaggeration, I've lost, and these are close personal friends, I've lost over maybe 70, 80 friends in the last 25 to 30 years. You know how crazy that is? It sounds crazy now, but at the time it was so, I don't even know if it was devastating, because you were surviving. You were trying to survive this, and every day you were just like making it. I remember one time there was about 7 to 9 funerals in 1 week.
Yes.
And it was just devastating. And I'm talking about pretty young men. They were 18, 17 years old, James, you know, and they were shriveling up, dying. And there was nobody to fight for them. There was nobody to say, wait a minute, hold up, we have rights. It was just really, really difficult time. And I come from a loving family, thank God. You know, I was fortunate that my mother accepted me, my family accepted me. But even then, it was rough, because I was still ostracized then, because they were always pointing, oh, that's the gay cousin. That's the one who hang with the drags, and all these things. It was never full acceptance. And I really need to say, too, it really wasn't full acceptance until I accepted myself first. You know, that was the first thing. But it was a really rough time. Yeah, the 80s was a bitch. Yeah.
Thank you.
And the 90s.
Yes, Lord.
All right, I come from a different perspective. My name is Gwendolyn Davis, and at that time, during the late 80s and 90s, I worked as a health educator at the Newark Health Department. I worked for the city for a while, and then I worked for the state. At the health department, we were talking about some strange, extraordinary disease that was going around, but nobody knew what was really going on. Earlier in 1983, one of our supervisors went to a conference at CDC and came back with this message that something was killing young men, and that nobody knew what was going on. In fact, as I recall now, there were people that were at the health department themselves that had this mysterious illness. And you could see them deteriorating right before your eyes, and you didn't know what was going on, and the doctors didn't know what was going on. So that was the high point. I was the health educator, but I only talked about sexually transmitted diseases. And at that time, they hadn't quite identified HIV as being a sexually transmitted disease when I started back in the early 80s. By the time they got the blood test in 1985, then we were able to determine, yes, some of these people are getting infected through having sexual contact. And then that became like my role. Then I had to talk to people, not only were they getting syphilis, but they were also getting gonorrhea, and we also were talking about chlamydia, and a host of other sexually transmitted diseases that nobody was really recognizing. There were people coming into the clinic. I should say that I was kind of naive when I first started out working as a health educator. First of all, I didn't get to work for the city of Newark till I think I was 34 when I started my job. And I was excited that I was going to talk about venereal disease, because that's what it was at that time. They've changed the name, I think, 3 times since then, but it all comes down to the same thing. But I thought that I was going to see prostitutes and pimps. Because regular people didn't get diseases. And that was what I had made up in my mind. That's how naive I was and how backwards I was. And then I was shocked when I got to the clinic and there were young men and women, there were housewives, there were gay people, there were all kinds of people that was really being attacked with sexually transmitted diseases. So that was my beginning. But when HIV and AIDS came along, excuse me, I knew I had to do more. And that's when I became we had to take a test and had to go through a large examination to be an HIV counselor. So then I was an STD counselor and an HIV counselor combined. And then after that kind of exposed me to what was really going on in our community. And I knew that I had to do something even more. So that's when it was time for me to join community organizations. So I joined, I think it was, I can't think of the name of the organization now, but it was all women's organization. Not a WUCA, not a WUCA at first. I joined a different organization that had all women, of course, and they had one black woman there. And she started the African American WUCA organization because nobody was really talking about women, period. Women had been like pushed to the background. So no one was discovering whether or not they were getting infected, but they were getting infected because they had, well, as they say now, that they had husbands or boyfriends that were in a closet that were having sex with men and not telling them and exposing them to the disease. So women were getting the infection. And this one black woman that belonged to this organization, she was already infected. And part of it was drugs because she was out there, and then part of it was through sexual contact. So that began my history with other organizations. So there was a WUCA, African American Women United Confronting AIDS, and at that time I met James Credle, and we started working together, trying to reach as many people as we could with the message that safer sex, you have this dreadful disease that's attacking your body for something that is so pleasurable as sexual contact. Yeah. So I felt it was my duty to try to explain to people what they could do. So like James just showed you all his little trinkets over there on the table, I had a few trinkets of my own. In fact, I had my trinkets stuck in a closet. My daughter found them one time. She wasn't sure what kind of job I had. But it's been an interesting ride. And I also will tell you about the ball. That was my first experience. I was an only child, so I was kind of closed off from a lot of what was going on in the world. So the ball was an explosion for me, and I just loved it, and I still love it right today. It was educational, especially at that time, because during the time that I went to the ball, we were all talking about HIV and AIDS. That was the subject. There was nothing else to talk about, that people were dying and that we needed to educate our people more. So part of the ball was also educational, as well as a lot of fun. And you know what? I'm going to stop talking and move over to someone else.
Good evening. I'm Peter Savastano. I'm an associate professor of the anthropology of religion, consciousness, sexuality, and gender at Seton Hall University. I'm also a native of Newark. I grew up here, and I actually live one town away in nearby Bloomfield, which might as well be Newark. And I've been involved in AIDS activism since the very early 1980s. At the time, I was working down at University Hospital at what was UMDNJ, now part of Rutgers University. And as Gwen said, there was this strange disease. When they finally started to figure out that something was going on, the name they gave to it was GRID, Gay-Related Infectious Disease. And this was a period of time where people who were at University Hospital, particularly with the symptoms of this disease that they knew very little bit about, but had a lot of stigma around it because it was associated with homosexuality. And also there were other high-risk groups. Among them were hemophiliacs, Haitians, and intravenous drug users. The logic of some of these risk groups many years later continues to baffle and defy me, but nevertheless those were the categories. And it was also a time where even the staff of the hospital would not bring people their food, would not go into their rooms, were covering themselves in all kinds of safety, protective clothing, and there was a small group of us working down at University Hospital who decided that more needed to be done, so we formed something called the AIDS Friendship Group. This was around 1984 and 1985, and on our lunch hours, we would give up our lunch hour and go around and visit with those people who were in the hospital suffering. We would bring them their food. We would sit and talk with them and also witness horrific suffering. This was a time when there was no treatment, no protease inhibitors, none of the kinds of cocktails that we have now. And I left University Hospital to go to graduate school. I was particularly interested in the religious and spiritual lives of LGBT persons. And we had gotten a rather large grant. I went to graduate school at nearby Drew University in Madison, New Jersey. I was a student in the theological school there. And we got a number of grants over, I would say, a 10 or 11 year period. And those grants were to study every aspect of religious life in and around the city of Newark. And we trained students to interview people, to take their oral histories. We did a number of documentary interviews with people in the community. I personally worked very closely with various houses in Newark, most closely with the House of Vizcaya, the House of Jourdan, and the House of Exotique. And there was a trade-off. The trade-off was, we will work with you, but then you have to participate in our life in whatever way that you can, including you have to walk in the balls, you have to come to the balls, you have to do all those kinds of things. So that was a trade-off that myself and one other graduate student, or I should say an agreement that we accepted, and we did. And one of the things that we would do is collaborate, for example, with Project Fire. James, Patrick, Bernie, Gwen, we all worked very closely together over those years. We did various kinds of fundraisers. It seemed like we were in 2 and 3 meetings a week. We had a number of different projects. We would go to these little mini balls that would take place at 2 o'clock in the morning with 20 people there. And we would go to these much larger balls, the Fireball, every year as well. One of the things that we did from the Newark project up at Drew is we had a videographer who would go around and he would film while some of us would interview people participating in the balls about why they were there, what the balls meant to them. We also sponsored a number of what we called memorial projects at the time. So we would create categories within the context of the ball where people would be asked to memorialize those members of their house families who had died from HIV and full-blown AIDS. And we began to build an archive. I personally did a number of ethnographic interviews with mothers and fathers of the houses, grandfathers and grandmothers of the houses, many children of the houses, about their spiritual lives, about their religious lives, about their suffering because of religion, about how they dealt with what it means to have a spirit and yet be totally excluded from any kind of institutional religious life. This was a time when if someone died of HIV, there was nowhere for them to have a funeral. Often their families had rejected them or would arrange for them to have a funeral, but with no mention of the reality of their lives, of what their sexuality was, of what they had suffered, none of those kinds of things. So it was a very deeply moving, but also a very painful experience in a lot of ways, because we were asking big questions, life and death questions, and it brought everything into the conversation: race, gender identity, class, sexuality, so much, the nature of human spirituality, all of those kinds of things. So that's about all I'll say for now.